Dog invades psychiatric clinic and prevents tragedy for young girl, leaving everyone shocked. In the sterile corridors of Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic in Seattle, the rhythmic beeping of machines and hushed whispers of staff members created a somber symphony. 8-year-old Emily sat motionless by the window, her vacant eyes fixed on the rainy world outside. Her small frame seemed to shrink further into the oversized hospital gown, a stark reminder of her prolonged stay. Dr. Thomas, a seasoned psychiatrist with kind eyes and graying hair, stood at the nurse's station, his brow furrowed as he reviewed Emily's file. "No change," he muttered, shaking his head. "It's been months, and we're no closer to breaking through." Grace, the head nurse, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We can't give up, Doctor. Emily needs us." As if on cue, a commotion erupted down the hall. Startled, Dr. Thomas and Grace rushed towards the source of the noise. What they found left them speechless. A large white dog stood in the middle of the corridor, its fur gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Its presence was as mysterious as it was impossible. The clinic's security was impenetrable, with no way for a stray animal to wander in undetected. "How on earth?" Dr. Thomas began, but his words trailed off as the dog trotted purposefully towards Emily's room. Grace moved to intercept the animal, but Dr. Thomas held her back. "Wait," he whispered, curiosity overtaking caution. "Let's see what happens." The dog pushed open Emily's door with its nose and padded softly to her side. For the first time in months, Emily's eyes flickered with recognition. She slowly turned her head, her gaze meeting the dog's warm brown eyes. "Spirit," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Doctor, fragile but unmistakable, graced the child's lips as she tentatively stroked the dog's fur. "It's a miracle," Grace breathed, tears welling in her eyes. But as they watched the touching scene unfold, neither Dr. Thomas nor Grace noticed the sudden tremor that passed through the other patients in the ward. In rooms up and down the hallway, monitors began to beep erratically, and patients stirred restlessly in their beds. The arrival of Spirit marked the beginning of a chain of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about healing, sacrifice, and the invisible bonds that connect us all. As days turned into weeks, Emily's progress astounded the entire staff at Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic. The once withdrawn child now spoke in full sentences, laughed, and even began to interact with other patients. Spirit remained by her side, a constant companion that seemed to anticipate her every need. Dr. Thomas couldn't contain his excitement as he updated Emily's father, Michael, over the phone. "It's remarkable, Mr. Anderson. Emily's responding to treatment in ways we never imagined possible. The dog was Spirit. It's as if he's unlocked something in her." Michael's voice cracked with emotion. That's wonderful news, Doctor. But did you say the dog's name is Spirit?" "Yes, that's what Emily calls him. Is that significant?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm not sure. It's probably nothing. I'll visit this weekend to see Emily's progress for myself." As Dr. Thomas hung up the phone, he couldn't shake the feeling that Michael was holding something back. But his contemplation was interrupted by Grace, who burst into his office, her face etched with concern. "Doctor, we have a situation," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Other patients are experiencing unusual symptoms." Dr. Thomas followed Grace to the common area, where several patients were gathered. The atmosphere was tense, a far cry from the peaceful environment they'd cultivated over the years. Sarah, a usually calm teenager, was pacing frantically, muttering under her breath. When Dr. Thomas approached her, she looked up with wild eyes. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "The whispers, they won't stop. They're telling me things, horrible things." Across the room, elderly Mr. Johnson sat in his wheelchair. He had similar experiences, unexplained anxiety, vivid nightmares, and intrusive thoughts that felt foreign and unsettling. Dr. Thomas turned to Grace, his face pale. "What's going on here?" Grace shook her head, her eyes darting to Emily's room, where the little girl sat contentedly playing with Spirit. "I don't know, Doctor, but I can't help but wonder, is it connected to Emily's improvement?" As if sensing their gaze, Emily looked up and smiled brightly at them. The contrast between her newfound happiness and the distress of the other patients was stark and unsettling. Dr. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. We need to investigate this further. Start monitoring all patients more closely. Record every incident, no matter how small. And Grace, keep a close eye on that dog. I have a feeling there's more to Spirit than meets the eye. As they dispersed to tend to the agitated patients, neither noticed the knowing look in Spirit's eyes as he watched them from Emily's side. The dog's tail wagged slowly, almost rhythmically, like a pendulum marking the passage of time, or perhaps the transfer of something far more intangible. The whispers in the ward grew louder, weaving a tapestry of shared pain and borrowed memories. And at the center of it all, Emily continued to bloom, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. The weekend arrived, bringing with it Michael Anderson's highly anticipated visit. As he walked through the clinic's doors, Michael's eyes darted nervously, as if expecting to see a ghost at every turn. Dr. Thomas greeted him warmly. "Mr. Anderson, welcome. Emily's been looking forward to your visit." Michael nodded distractedly. "How is she and the dog?" "Emily's doing remarkably well. As for Spirit, he's been a constant presence. We're still trying to figure out where he came from, but—" Michael cut him off. "May I see my daughter now, please?" Dr. Thomas led Michael to Emily's room, where the little girl was sitting on her bed, Spirit curled up at her feet. The moment Emily saw her father, she leaped up with a joy that brought tears to Michael's eyes. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, throwing herself into his arms. Michael held her tight, his body shaking with silent sobs. "Oh, Emily, my sweet girl." As father and daughter embraced, Spirit lifted his head, his gaze fixed on Michael. The man froze, his face draining of color. "Mr. Anderson?" Dr. Thomas asked, concerned. "Are you all right?" Michael swallowed hard. I need to speak with you privately." Thomas leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Michael took a deep breath. "It sounds crazy, but whenever someone in our family faces a great trauma or suffering, Spirit appears. He helps them heal, comforts them. But there's always a cost." "A cost?" Dr. Thomas echoed. "Yes. When I was a child, my mother fell into a deep depression after losing her job. Spirit appeared, and within weeks, she was herself again. But during that time, my father became irritable, anxious. It was as if Spirit was transferring my mother's pain to him." Dr. Thomas's mind raced, connecting the dots between Michael's story and the recent events in the clinic. "And you've seen this happen before?" Michael nodded solemnly. "Throughout our family history, there are stories, legends really, of Spirit appearing in times of need. But his help always comes with a price. Someone else always suffers." As Michael spoke, Grace knocked on the door, her face ashen. "Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have an emergency. Mr. Johnson, he's experiencing some kind of breakdown." They rushed to the common area, where Mr. Johnson was curled up on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "The little girl," he wailed. "She's so alone, so scared. I can feel her pain." Emily appeared in the doorway, Spirit by her side. Her eyes were wide with concern. "What's wrong with Mr. Johnson?" As Dr. Thomas and Grace tended to the distraught patient, Michael knelt beside his daughter. "Emily, sweetie, how do you feel when you're with Spirit?" Emily smiled, petting the dog's head. "I feel better, Daddy. Like all the scary thoughts are going away." Michael exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Thomas over Emily's head. The implications were clear and terrifying. As the day wore on, more patients exhibited signs of emotional distress. The staff worked tirelessly to maintain order, but a sense of unease permeated the clinic. That night, as Emily slept peacefully for the first time in months, Spirit prowled the darkened corridors. The dog paused at each door, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. And in their rooms, patients tossed and turned, their dreams filled with fragments of a little girl's pain and fear. The shadows of the past were lengthening, and the true nature of Spirit's presence was only beginning to reveal itself. As the clinic descended into chaos, Dr. Thomas, Grace, and Michael found themselves facing an impossible dilemma. one that would test the very limits of their understanding of healing, sacrifice, and the bonds that tie us all together. As dawn broke over Seattle, casting long shadows across the clinic's grounds, Dr. Thomas found himself poring over patient files in his office. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night. Spent wrestling with the implications of Michael's revelation and the escalating situation in the ward. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Grace entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Any changes overnight?" Grace sighed, sinking into a chair. "It's getting worse, doctor. 3 more patients reported vivid nightmares. Sarah tried to harm herself, saying she needed to make the whispers stop. And Mr. Johnson, he's refusing to eat, claiming he feels Emily's fear of abandonment so strongly that it's making him physically ill." Dr. Thomas ran a hand over his face. "And Emily? That's the strangest part," Grace said, her brow furrowed. "She's thriving. This morning, she asked for her favorite breakfast and talked about wanting to go home soon. It's like she's a completely different child from the one who arrived here months ago." As they sat in contemplative silence, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face haggard. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I kept thinking about what's happening here. I think I know more about Spirit than I initially let on." Dr. Thomas gestured for him to sit. "Please, Mr. Anderson, any information you have could be crucial." Michael took a deep breath. "In our family, there's an old story passed down through generations. They say Spirit isn't just a dog, but a kind of psychic conduit." "I don't know the mechanics of it," Michael said, shaking his head. "But the story goes that Spirit appears to those in the greatest pain, offering them a choice, a chance to heal, but at a cost to others." Dr. Thomas's mind raced. "So you're saying that Emily's recovery might be coming at the expense of the other patients?" "Mental health," Michael finished grimly. The implications hung heavy in the air. Dr. Thomas stood, pacing the small office. "If this is true, we're facing an ethical nightmare. We can't prioritize one patient's well-being over others, but we also can't ignore the progress Emily's made." Grace spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "There's something else to consider. If Spirit is really transferring emotional energy, what happens when there's no one left to transfer it to? Would Emily relapse?" The question sent a chill through the room. The delicate balance they'd been maintaining suddenly seemed precarious, ready to topple at any moment. "We need to talk to Emily," Dr. Thomas decided. "If there's any chance she understands what's happening, we need to know." As they made their way to Emily's room, the clinic seemed to hold its breath. Patients watched them pass with wary eyes, as if sensing the weight of the moment. They found Emily sitting on her bed, Spirit curled up beside her. She looked up as they entered, her eyes bright and alert. "Good morning," she chirped. "Is everything okay?" Dr. Thomas knelt beside her bed, his voice gentle. "Emily, we need to ask you some questions about Spirit. Is that all right?" Emily nodded, her hand resting protectively on the dog's back. "Has Spirit talked to you?" Dr. Thomas asked carefully. To their surprise, Emily nodded again. "In my dreams," she said matter-of-factly. "He tells me stories and helps me understand things." Michael stepped forward, his voice trembling. "What kind of things, kind sweetheart?" Emily's face grew serious. "He says I have a choice to make, that I can get better, but that it might make other people feel sad for a while. He says it's like sharing a burden." The adults exchanged alarmed glances. Emily's words confirmed their worst fears. She was aware, at least on some level, of the impact her recovery was having on others. "Emily," Grace said softly, "how do you feel about that? About other people feeling sad so you can feel better?" The little girl was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "I don't want anyone to be sad," she said, "but Spirit says sometimes, to heal, we have to share our pain with others who are strong enough to carry it for a while." As Emily spoke, Spirit lifted his head, his gaze moving from one adult to another. There was an unmistakable intelligence in those brown eyes, a silent challenge that seemed to ask, "What will you do now that you know the truth?" The invisible thread connecting Emily, Spirit, and the other patients suddenly felt tangible, a web of shared pain and healing that defied conventional understanding. As Dr. Thomas, Grace, and Michael stood in stunned silence, they realized they were on the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of not just Emily's life, but the lives of everyone in the clinic. The true test was only beginning, and the choices they would face in the coming days would challenge everything they thought they knew about the nature of healing, sacrifice, and the invisible bonds that tie us all together. As news of Emily's awareness spread through the clinic, a palpable tension settled over the ward. Staff members whispered in corners, casting furtive glances at Emily's room, while patients oscillated between hope and fear. Hope that their suffering might have purpose, and fear of what that purpose might entail. Dr. Thomas called an emergency meeting with his team, including Grace and several other key staff members. They gathered in the conference room, the weight of their dilemma hanging heavy in the air. "We're in uncharted territory," Dr. Thomas began, his voice grave. "We have a patient who's making remarkable progress, but at an unacceptable cost to others. We need to decide how to proceed." One of the younger doctors spoke up. "Couldn't we just remove the dog? If Spirit is the conduit, wouldn't separating him from Emily solve the problem?" Michael, who had been invited to join the meeting, shook his head. "It's not that simple. In our family's experience, once Spirit forms a connection, it doesn't break easily. Removing him might cause more harm than good." Grace leaned forward, her eyes intense. "What if we tried to spread the effect more evenly? If we could somehow distribute Emily's emotional burden across a larger group, it might be more manageable for everyone." As the discussion continued, spiraling into increasingly complex ethical debates, a commotion outside the room caught their attention. They rushed out to find a crowd gathered around Sarah's room. The teenager was standing on her bed, her eyes wild and unfocused. "I can see her!" she shouted. "I can see Emily's memories." Dr. Thomas approached cautiously. "Sarah, what do you mean? What are you seeing?" Sarah's gaze darted around the room, seeing things invisible to others. A dark room, a man yelling, Emily crying, so afraid. She clutched her head, tears streaming down her face. "It hurts. It hurts so much." As the staff worked to calm Sarah, Emily appeared in the doorway, Spirit by her side. The little girl's face was a mask of concern and guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." The scene unfolding before them crystallized the gravity of their situation. It was no longer just a matter of abstract ethical debate. The consequences of Spirit's presence were becoming increasingly tangible and distressing. Back in the conference room, the team regrouped, their faces grim. "We can't continue like this," Grace said firmly. "We're meant to be healing these people, not subjecting them to additional trauma." Dr. Thomas nodded, his expression troubled. "Agreed, but we can't ignore Emily's progress either. We need to find a way to balance this, to harness whatever power Spirit possesses without causing harm." Michael, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke up. "There might be a way," he said hesitantly. "In our family stories, there's mention of a ritual, a way to communicate directly with Spirit and negotiate the terms of his help." All eyes turned to Michael, a mix of skepticism and desperate hope on their faces. "What kind of ritual?" Dr. Thomas asked. Michael took a deep breath. "It's said that at the stroke of midnight, in a place of significance to the person Spirit is helping, a chosen mediator can speak with him. But it's dangerous. The mediator risks being overwhelmed by the collective pain Spirit is managing." A heavy silence fell over the room as they contemplated this new information. The idea seemed far-fetched, bordering on the supernatural, but given what they had already witnessed, they couldn't dismiss it outright. "I'll do it," Grace said suddenly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I've been with Emily since she arrived. I've seen her at her worst and at her best." Eyes were fixed on her, filled with an ancient wisdom. "Is it time?" Emily asked softly. Spirit tilted his head, as if considering her question. Then, slowly and deliberately, he nodded. Emily took a deep breath, squaring her small shoulders. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." As night fell over the clinic, A sense of anticipation and dread settled over the ward. In just a few hours, they would attempt to communicate with a being they barely understood, in a desperate bid to save not just Emily, but all those affected by Spirit's mysterious power. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge the boundaries between the physical and the metaphysical, between healing and harm, between sacrifice and salvation. And at the center of it all was a little girl, a mysterious dog, and the invisible threads of pain and hope that bound them all together. As the clock ticked relentlessly towards midnight, the Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic hummed with nervous energy. Staff members moved through the halls with quiet urgency, checking on patients and making last-minute preparations for the unprecedented event about to unfold. In Emily's room, transformed into the focal point for the impending ritual, Dr. Thomas, Grace, and Michael gathered. Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, Spirit curled protectively at her side. The little girl's face was a mixture of anticipation and fear, her small hand buried in the dog's white fur. "Are you sure about this, Grace?" Dr. Thomas asked for what felt like the 100th time. "We don't know what you might be exposing yourself to." Grace nodded, her face set with determination. "I'm sure, Doctor. We've come too far to turn back now." Michael placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything you're doing for Emily, for all of us." As the minutes ticked by, an eerie calm settled over the room. The usual beeps and whirs of medical equipment seemed muted, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation. At precisely 5 minutes to midnight, Spirit lifted his head, his eyes locking with Grace's. The nurse felt a shiver run down her spine, but she held the dog's gaze steadily. "It's time," Emily whispered, her voice unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Grace took a deep breath and moved to sit on the floor in front of Spirit. "Doctor." Thomas and Michael retreated to the corners of the room, silent witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. As the clock struck midnight, a change came over the room. The air seemed to thicken, and the shadows in the corners deepened. Spirit's eyes began to glow with an otherworldly light, and when he opened his mouth, the voice that emerged was not the bark of a dog, but a deep, resonant sound that seemed to bypass their ears and speak directly to their minds, harming others. The spectral voice of Spirit seemed to sigh, a sound filled with ancient weariness. "The balance of pain and healing is delicate. What I offer is not magic, but a redistribution of suffering. To lift the burden from one, and others must bear its weight." "But why?" Grace pressed. "Why must it be this way?" "Because pain shared is pain diminished," Spirit replied. "Humans are not meant to bear their burdens alone. What you see as a curse is also a gift, the gift of connection, of shared experience." As Spirit spoke, Grace felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Suddenly, she was drowning in a sea of feelings not her own. Emily's fear and loneliness, Sarah's anger and confusion, Mr. Johnson's grief and regret. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to maintain her sense of self amidst the onslaught. "Stop!" Dr. Thomas cried out, moving to intervene, but Michael held him back. "Wait," Michael said, his eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. "Look at Emily." The little girl's eyes were closed, her face peaceful for the first time since her arrival at the clinic. As Grace bore the weight of the collective pain, Emily seemed to glow with an inner light. Spirit continued, his voice gentler now. "The choice has always been yours. Emily's healing can continue, but it requires willing participants to share her burden. Or she can return to her former state, freeing the others from this connection." Grace, still reeling from the emotional deluge, managed to find her voice. "Isn't there another way, a middle ground?" For a long moment, Spirit was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. "There is, but it requires a sacrifice of a different kind, a voluntary sharing of strength, not just from the patients, but from all who wish to help. It would be slower, less dramatic, but ultimately more sustainable." As the implications of Spirit's words sank in, the air in the room seemed to lighten. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and Spirit's eyes returned to their normal, warm brown. Grace slumped forward, exhausted, but enlightened. "Doctor." Dr. Thomas looked from Emily to Grace, then to Spirit. "I think," he said slowly, "we've just been given a new path forward, one that will require all of us to work together in ways we never imagined." As the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows, the occupants of the room felt a shift in the air, a sense of hope, tempered with the knowledge that the real work was just beginning. The midnight hour had passed, but its revelations would echo through the halls of Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic for days, weeks, and months to come. The true test of healing, they now understood, lay not in miraculous cures, but in the willingness of a community to share both pain and strength. As Spirit settled back into his place beside Emily, his tail wagging gently, the first threads of a new, more intricate web of healing began to weave themselves through the clinic. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in months, it was a journey filled with genuine hope. In the days following the midnight ritual, Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic underwent a transformation that was subtle yet profound. The air of desperation that had permeated the halls gave way to a sense of cautious optimism as Dr. Thomas and his team began to implement their new approach to healing. They called it the Shared Strength Initiative, a program designed to distribute the emotional burden more evenly among willing participants. Not just patients, guys, but staff members and even volunteers from the community. The concept was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of one person bearing the full weight of trauma, many would carry a small piece, making the load manageable for all. Emily became the centerpiece of this new approach, but no longer as a passive recipient of Spirit's mysterious power. Instead, she took on an active role in her own healing and in helping others. With Spirit by her side, she began to share her experiences in group therapy sessions, her words serving as a catalyst for others to open up about their own struggles. Grace, forever changed by her experience as the mediator, took charge of coordinating the initiative. She worked tirelessly to match patients with suitable support networks, ensuring that no one person was overwhelmed by the shared emotional weight. The results were not immediate or dramatic, but they were undeniable. Slowly but surely, patients began to show signs of improvement. Sarah, once tormented by vivid nightmares, found solace in art therapy, her paintings serving as a window into the shared experiences of the group. Mr. Johnson, who had been on the brink of giving up, discovered a new purpose in mentoring younger patients, his wisdom and compassion touching lives in ways he never thought possible. Dr. Thomas watched these changes with a mixture of awe and scientific curiosity. He began documenting the process meticulously, hoping to one day share their findings with the broader psychiatric community. "What we're witnessing here," he told his team during one of their daily briefings, "is nothing short of a paradigm shift in mental health treatment." But the path forward was not without its challenges. Some patients struggled with the concept of shared healing, fearful of exposing their vulnerabilities or bearing the pain of others. Others embraced it too eagerly, risking emotional burnout in their desire to help. It was during one such moment of crisis that the true power of their new approach revealed itself. Lisa, a new patient who had been making steady progress, suddenly experienced a severe panic attack during a group session. As the staff rushed to her aid, something remarkable happened. Emily, guided by some instinct beyond her years, approached Lisa and took her hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're here with you. You're not alone." One by one, other patients and staff members formed a circle around Lisa, each placing a hand on her shoulder or arm. As they stood there, connected physically and emotionally, Lisa's breathing began to slow. The panic that had gripped her moments before seemed to dissipate, absorbed and diluted by the collective strength of those around her. Michael, who had chosen to stay at the clinic to support Emily and contribute to the program, watched the scene unfold with tears in his eyes. He turned to Dr. Thomas, his voice filled with wonder. "This is it, isn't it? This is what Spirit was trying to show us all along." Dr. Thomas nodded, his own eyes misty. "The power of connection, of shared experience. It's not about one miracle cure, but about creating a community of healing." As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the Shared Strength Initiative continued to evolve. The clinic became a model for a new kind of psychiatric care, one that recognized the interconnectedness of human experiences and the healing power of collective support. Emily, once a withdrawn and traumatized child, blossomed into a beacon of hope for others. Her laughter, once so rare, now rang through the halls regularly. Spirit remained by her side, no longer a mysterious conduit of pain, but a symbol of the unbreakable bond between all those who had chosen to walk this path together. Yet, as the program gained recognition and success, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. The outside world, hearing whispers of the miraculous changes at Evergreen, began to take notice. Journalists clamored for interviews, and medical professionals from around the country sought to observe their methods. Dr. Thomas and his team found themselves at a crossroads. They had created something beautiful and transformative, but sharing it with the world would mean exposing their patients and the truth about spirit to intense scrutiny. As they grappled with this dilemma, Emily's words from months ago echoed in their minds. Sometimes to heal, we have to share our pain with others who are strong enough to carry it for a while. The question now was the world ready to carry this knowledge? And more importantly, were they ready to share it? The final chapter of their journey was about to unfold, one that would test not just their commitment to healing, but their faith in humanity's capacity for understanding and acceptance. The sun rose over Seattle, casting a warm glow through the windows of Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic. In the months since the implementation of the Shared Strength Initiative, the facility had transformed from a place of quiet desperation to a beacon of hope in the mental health community. Dr. Thomas stood at the window of his office, watching as patients and staff members gathered in the garden for their morning meditation session. Emily, now a vibrant 9-year-old, sat at the center of the group, Spirit faithfully by her side. The sight brought a smile to the doctor's face, but it was tinged with apprehension. A knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. Grace entered, carrying a stack of newspapers and printouts. "It's happening, Doctor," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "The world is starting to take notice." Dr. Thomas sighed, taking the materials from her. Headlines jumped out at him: "Miracle at Evergreen," "Revolutionary mental health treatment, baffles experts," "Spirit of healing, the dog that's changing psychiatric care," "Shared strength, a new paradigm in mental health." "We knew this day would come," he said, sinking into his chair. "The question is, what do we do now?" As if in answer to his question, Michael burst into the office, his face flushed with excitement. "You won't believe who just called," he said breathlessly. "The National Institute of Mental Health. They want to send a team to study our methods." The news hung in the air, its implications rippling through the room like a stone thrown into a still pond. This was the moment they had both dreaded and hoped for, the opportunity to share their groundbreaking work with the world, but also the risk of exposing their patients to intense scrutiny. "We need to talk to Emily," Grace said softly, "and to Spirit. This decision affects them more than anyone." They found Emily in the garden, giggling as Spirit performed tricks for a group of delighted patients. When she saw the serious expressions on the adults' faces, she sobered immediately. "It's time, isn't it?" she asked, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. Dr. Thomas knelt beside her. "Emily, people outside the clinic are starting to ask questions about what's happening here, about you and about Spirit. We need to decide if we're ready to share our story with the world." Emily was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on Spirit's head. When she looked up, her eyes were clear and determined. "Spirit says we've been given a gift," she said, "and gifts are meant to be shared." Her words set in motion a whirlwind of activity. Over the next few weeks, the clinic prepared to open its doors to the world. Patients were counseled on how to handle media attention, and staff members were briefed on the importance of protecting patient privacy while still sharing the essence of their revolutionary approach. The day the NIMH team arrived, the clinic buzzed with nervous energy. As Dr. Thomas led the group of distinguished researchers through the facility, he was struck by the transformation he witnessed in his patients. Those who had once hidden from the world now spoke confidently about their experiences, their voices strong as they described the power of shared healing. Sarah, once tormented by nightmares, proudly displayed her artwork, explaining how it helped her process not just her own trauma, but the collective experiences of the group. Mr. Johnson, standing tall despite his advanced age, described how the act of mentoring others had given him a new lease on life. But it was Emily who truly captured the researchers' attention. As she sat in the garden, Spirit by her side, she spoke with a clarity and insight that left the scientists in awe. Spirit showed us that pain doesn't have to be faced alone, she explained. When we share our burdens, they become lighter, and when we share our strength, it grows. Emily smiled, scratching Spirit behind the ears. Spirit is special, she said, but the real magic is in all of us. We just needed someone to show us how to connect. As the day wore on, the NIMH team observed therapy sessions, interviewed patients and staff, and pored over Dr. Thomas's meticulous records. What they witnessed challenged everything they thought they knew about mental health treatment. At the end of their visit, the lead researcher approached Dr. Thomas, her face a mix of excitement and disbelief. "What you've achieved here is nothing short of revolutionary," she said. "We'd like to propose a long-term study, how to fully document and understand your methods." Dr. Thomas felt a surge of pride, tempered with caution. "And our patients, how can we ensure their well-being throughout this process?" The researcher smiled. "That's the beauty of what you've created here, Dr. Thomas. Your patients are not subjects to be studied, but partners in the healing process. We want to learn from them and with them." As word of Evergreen's success spread, the clinic became a pilgrimage site for mental health professionals from around the world. Each visitor left transformed, carrying with them the seeds of a new approach to healing. But with greater exposure came greater challenges. Skeptics emerged, questioning the scientific validity of their methods. Some religious groups claimed Spirit was a divine manifestation, while others denounced the program as New Age quackery. Through it all, the Evergreen community stood strong. Patients who had once been defined by their illnesses became advocates and educators, sharing their stories with quiet dignity. Staff members worked tirelessly to balance the demands of research with the day-to-day needs of their patients. And at the heart of it all was Emily, growing stronger and wiser with each passing day. She became a symbol of hope, her journey from a withdrawn, traumatized child to a beacon of healing, inspiring countless others. As the sun set on another day at Evergreen, Dr. Thomas found Emily and Spirit in their favorite spot in the garden. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Emily smiled, her eyes shining with a mix of childlike innocence and profound understanding. "I'm okay," she said. "Spirit says our work is just beginning." Dr. Thomas nodded, gazing out at the clinic grounds where patients and staff mingled freely, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "I think Spirit is right," he said. "We've started something here that's bigger than any of us." As if in agreement, Spirit let out a soft bark, his tail wagging gently. The sound seemed to echo across the grounds, a reminder of the mysterious force that had brought them all together and the incredible journey that lay ahead. In that moment, Dr. Thomas realized that what they had discovered at Evergreen was more than just a new treatment method. It was a fundamental truth about human nature, that in sharing our pain and our strength, we find not just healing, but connection, purpose, and hope. The story of Emily, Spirit, and the Evergreen Psychiatric Clinic would continue to unfold, touching lives far beyond the walls of the facility. It was a testament to the power of compassion, the strength found in vulnerability, and the healing that comes when we open our hearts to one another. As night fell over Seattle, the lights of Evergreen glowed warmly, a beacon of hope in a world that so desperately needed it. And in gardens and hospitals, homes and community centers around the world, the ripples of their shared strength continued to spread, promising a new dawn in the field of mental health and human connection.